That's so right, that they take care of their old folks instead of dumping them in a nursing home. So I agree. That's one of the best things about the Amish way of life is how they take care of the older generation. They take care of everybody. Nowadays, everybody's too busy to take care of their parents, their grandparents. So my grandparents, for example, my mom's dad passed away from diabetes, I do believe, before I was born. He died young. He did not take care of his diabetes, and it caught up to him. And I never got to meet him. But my grandmother, my mom's mom, she lived with my uncle in an addition he had built on his house. Or I guess my uncle lived in the addition. They built an addition onto the house, and my uncle and aunt and kids lived in the addition, and my grandmother lived in the original part of the house. And you could just like walk through the door into my uncle's house or into my grandma's house. There was a door right there, and they were back and forth all the time. They took care of my grandmother. And then obviously my uncle, fed her horse and all this other stuff. She survived my grandfather by about 30 years, but in the end, she was also diabetic. She passed away at like 85, I do believe. And she spent the last few months in my mom's house. My mom was taking care of her, since my mom was like her legal guardian. I don't know, not guardian, but she was the one who was assigned to take care of my grandmother. And my uncle was always busy, so it would have just left my uncle's wife, who wasn't related to her. She would have rather had my mom. And then my other aunt also came and spent a lot of time at my mom's house. And, they spent a lot of time with her in the final days, and they were both there, when she passed away. And then my grandfather on the other side, my grandfather, grandmother, and my one unmarried aunt, they lived in a dotty house, in a small house off the mosquitoes, in a small house across the lane from the main house that used to be my grandpa's farmhouse. When he sold the farm to my uncle, he built just a small house for him and my grandmother and my one aunt that was an old maid. And then my grandmother passed away, and my grandfather still stayed there. Obviously, he would still walk out to the barn and feed his own horse, stuff like that. He lived to be almost 92 years old, and he was an Amish bishop, and he passed away after preaching the closing sermon that day. Every church service, there are two sermons. There's an opening sermon of around an hour, then there's a closing sermon of about an hour and a half, or maybe 45 minutes for the first one, hour and a half, to sometimes 2 hours for the closing sermon. Depends how fast they preach. And after church, he was 91 years old. He was sitting there eating lunch, and all of a sudden he just stands up from the table and then just falls over from a massive heart attack.